What I'd like to talk about is the fact that I was an employee of Dell Computer Corporation at that time, and I was also working on my doctorate at the University of Texas at Austin during the years leading up to the Enron debacle and for a couple of years thereafter. My role within Dell was to hire high-level executives for the organization. And I had been there for 10 years prior to the 2000s. And we all were experiencing the sudden wealth, the exponential growth of the company, the increase in value of our stock options. And what I noted at that time was what was happening to people in general in the work environment. Being a student also in organizational behavior at the University of Texas, I came into contact with some of the same professors that were teaching the EMBA and the MBA students at the University of Texas. Many of those individuals were being recruited by Enron. Some were also being recruited by Dell, but we were seeking more of the engineering talent than we were the business students. It was well known then that very few universities were teaching ethics in their academic programs. And the University of Texas was little exception. They did have one professor, and his class was an optional course for the MBA students. And I remember him saying after the information about Enron began to break, how few students actually opted to take the ethics course. Now what we're seeing is a tremendous emphasis on ethics in our academic curriculum. Here at the Daniels College of Business, it is a foundation course and it's expected for every single student. I've seen many universities change their curriculum in favor of trying to build this moral fabric back into the psyche of the individuals that are graduating from the academic programs. I think in order to do that, though, people really need to understand what tempts them, what motivates them, what the long-range outcomes might be, and not to become so focused on immediate wealth and sort of a greedy perspective of what can be obtained in the corporate world.
Well, at the time the Enron episode occurred, at the turn of the century, there were a number of accounting scandals that occurred. There was Enron, Delphia, WorldCom, HealthSouth, and all of them had a common trait: the drive for success, the drive for profits, the drive for growth, all resulted in unsustainable situations for each of those companies. And as a result, what ended up happening was they looked to accounting as a way to continue that growth, to continue that success, and to deliver the profits that were expected. And so from a regulator perspective, from a business community perspective, when profit and growth and success becomes the expected mandate, what'll happen a lot is, if that's not sustainable, people will continue to look to accomplish it in a number of ways, including ways that we wouldn't approve of as a society.
Well, I think there's at least three important lessons that come out of the Enron experience. The first is the importance of transparency. Transparency in terms of openness of information, what's available to various people. I think it's really critical that transparency is part of corporate governance. Of course, there are regulations by the SEC about things that cannot be discussed in a publicly traded company, but I think we fall far short of those regulations in our normal behavior. So transparency needs to be encouraged. The second lesson has to do with toxic corporate cultures. We really disregard, I think, how much of an influence a corporate culture has on our own individual behavior. We like to believe that we would never do something that we know in our heart is wrong. We do it all the time. All we need is an environment that aids and abets inappropriate behavior. This is largely the work of Professor Philip Zimbardo, the Stanford social psychologist, reported in his book, The Lucifer Effect. The third lesson, I think, has to do with the reward system. If you ever observe behavior that you think is inappropriate or unusual or surprising to you, a good way of diagnosing the source of that behavior is to look at what behavior was rewarded. Rewarded behavior is repeated, behavior that is punished is avoided, and I think we have to look very seriously at reward and incentive systems in companies that encourage, even if it's something that we're not really aware of and aren't doing deliberately, we can inadvertently be rewarding the wrong behavior.
Dan, I think Enron is a lesson in behavior, and it's a lesson in principled behavior. I look at it from the perspective of someone who's been a financial officer of a number of corporations, and I'm currently a member of the board of directors of several public corporations. And as I look back on the situation, what strikes me the most is that the individuals that were engaged in the behavior there were motivated by personal gain. I don't think they took the time to stand back and look at how their behavior was actually going to be judged, would be judged, or even if it should be judged. And it's only really through the benefit of hindsight that we look at what happened. The individuals thought, from all indications, that they were in compliance with rules. There were accounting rules, there were regulatory rules, there were even governance rules within their own corporate body. As a consequence, I think that they believed that they were complying entirely with the rules. And by not standing back and considering the principles that were at stake and whether what they were doing was morally right, not necessarily just legally right, it created the opportunity for the problem to evolve.
I think one of the things that most companies have come to realize, and most investor groups have come to realize, is the importance of independent directors. I think you have to have someone who is not part of the day-to-day management team. You have to have someone who is watching and really focused on the best interest of the shareholders as you go into the decision-making process that a company goes through. So I think what most companies have picked up on is the importance of that outside director and the opinion that they can bring. Too many companies in the past have also relied on, for lack of a better word, a celebrity type of director that brings a big name and some connections. And while that can be very important, I think instead what you really need is someone who is really focused on trying to ensure that the company is operating at its highest level, is engaged in ethical behavior, and is performing to the best of its ability.
I think the principal lessons learned that there are both non-financial and fraudulent red flags to detect fraud, earnings management, financial shenanigans, manipulations, whatever you want to call it. And let me go into the non-financial red flags first. And here's a quote from Sir David Tweedy, who was the chair of the International Accounting Standards Board. And he said, the scandals we've seen in recent years are also attributed to accounting, although in fact I think the US cases are corporate governance scandals involving fraud. And I would also say we've studied in our research Parmalat in Italy and Satyam in Asia, and their nicknames are Europe's Enron and Asia's Enron respectively, and I think these same red flags apply to some of these big international frauds too.